it's really important for students to understand in advance, and for us to understand in advance, what examiners are looking for when they come to assess a student's thesis or dissertation. It isn't really giving the game away by using the research and experience about what examiners are looking for and how they go about reading and assessing students' work, and then letting students know exactly what they're looking for, because it isn't a game of hide and seek. There are clear criteria, and they are used and understood differently a bit by different examiners perhaps, but the more students can work out how they can work towards what an examiner considers to be good research learning expressed in a good thesis or dissertation, the less mystifying the whole process is. Vernon Trafford and Josh Lechem have written a book called Stepping Stones to Achieving Your Doctorate, which explores the examination process. And Margaret Kiley and Jerry Mullins and others, Alison Holbrook, etc., in Australia have done a lot of research on this. So I'm exploring some of the work that we've done that builds on examiner expectations and ways in which supervisors can learn from what examiners have said they're looking for in the reports and in interviews. So we're thinking about how, as supervisors, we can advise students to research and write their work. So it's going to be not just acceptable, not just good enough for an examiner, but also something that's quite exciting, that represents the contribution to knowledge and is readable and clearly shows that they've made learning leaps in their work and they are now fully fledged researchers and that the work is good. So what do students need to do? Well, some bits of our research had actual quotes from examiners. So one of them is talking about a not very good thesis, actually uses images of lights and illumination and says it's not illuminating. I want to see lights come on in what the person is saying and what they've achieved. If it's flat, if it's pedestrian and flat, you know, they can tick the boxes, they've done this, they've done that, they've done that, then that's a straightforward thesis work. But something that's moving on from that, the exception, is where I see illuminated thinking coming through in the sections. So examiners we spoke to want the students to move away from just doing really good, solid work and also show their excitement and their contributions to knowledge, their newness, the illumination. So they're using sort of the language of lights, and they're also exploring several different characteristics of a good thesis or a good dissertation. So just thinking about what Kiley and Mullins found, the report suggests that good theses have got critical analysis and argument. So the students have critiqued what others have said, they've critiqued their own work, and they've developed an argument all the way through the thesis. So they've done the research, and then they've written it up as well as they can to develop this argument. They've got confidence and a rigorous self-critical approach. They know what they found, they know how they found it, they express it confidently. It's well founded in the literature, it's well founded in the research, the data backs up their arguments, and they're confident that they've got something to say. They have a voice in the field. But it's rigorous. They've tested things, they've worked hard to make sure that the way they went about the research is solid, dependable, and that the claims they've made are based on the evidence grounded in the literature. So they've really done a good job here. But they're also self-critical. They don't overclaim. They're not overconfident. If they make a claim, they can back it up with evidence. This is what researchers do. They're not, after all, politicians. They're not people selling you something. They've actually got research to back up what they're arguing, and they're confident and self-critical. They make a contribution to knowledge. Well, what's that then? What is a contribution to knowledge? Some of the first piece of work that was done on what examiners are looking for talks about contribution to knowledge, originality, creativity, and publishability. And that work was done by Richard Winter. So everyone's talking about contribution to knowledge. The researcher has moved the field on. They might not have split the atom. They might not have made a massive original contribution that surprises everybody, but they might have changed the way in which you think about something. They might well have found something new that adds to the field. They might have queried or contested something. So it's a contribution, a big enough contribution. It's original enough. Maybe the originality, maybe part of the contribution, is having asked the question in a different context, so that the context, perhaps a cultural context, nuances the answer. It's a bit different because I asked that question here. Let me tell you why it's different. And they've made that explicit. So they're also original, creative, and this might be a bit of surprise, there's a degree of risk-taking in the work. So that maybe they've asked questions that others haven't asked. They've tried something out that hasn't been tried out before. Or they're arguing a case and they know that people might argue against them. There is some risk-taking. It's not just an extremely modest, secure activity. You're risking, while you're doing research, whether you understand, or you're going to understand, whether an experiment will work or not, whether you will find things that others will be interested in. That it's comprehensive and scholarly, so when they make a statement, they can back it up with the evidence. When they refer to something, they know where the reference comes from. You feel secure when you read their work, that they've really done a solid piece of work. But it doesn't just stick with the solid, it also offers something new, something exciting, something well expressed. And that's where this other element comes in, that students are quite surprised about sometimes. And that's about the quality of the presentation and the structure and the organisation of the work. After all, as we were saying when we looked at the writing, how well they organise and argue and make a case for their work is the way in which they can convince others that they found something and that it's worth considering. So the presentation is important. And when Kylie and Mullins looked at this work, they found that examiners were very insecure about the quality of the research if they found shoddy presentation. And one of our examiners said if they found 12 typos in the first couple of pages, they didn't trust the research. So advice to students from supervisors is not only about making these leaps in learning, it's also about solid scholarly work and very good presentation. And part of the presentation is about getting that red thread of the argument and organising the piece so it flows well, so it makes its case. So these breakthroughs in learning have to be accompanied by good writing. And then finally, sound methodology. So you're not claiming you're finding things, and yet we go back and you've got a sample size of 3 and you don't know why you have only 3 and it's not defendable. So a sound methodology. So if those are some of the characteristics of a good thesis, and as I said, there's a lot of research on this, it's important to make this explicit to the students and to set up moments where they might have a look at some successful theses and process the way in which they've been writing and maybe audit them against those sorts of good characteristics. Have a look at those characteristics and measure them against their own developing work. Have explicit conversations about how they can make sure they're being scholarly, how they can make sure that their work is well organised. So preparing students well for the examination by making explicit what examiners are looking for. And then also, should they have an oral or a viva, enabling them to try out some of the questions that an examiner in an oral would ask, which actually are the ones that are in the head of an examiner who only reads the work. Such complex questions as, what is your conceptual framework? Exploring that and finding some answers so that students are confident about what they're doing. So if they're going to go for an oral, then it's a good idea to give them a mock oral, a mock viva, where these questions are asked. Some of them about the structure and process of the work, the conceptual framework, the methodology and methods, and the contribution to knowledge, which are not ordinary questions, they are postgraduate research questions, and some specific questions about elements of their actual writing and their actual findings. And giving them a few dry runs and getting them to talk to their colleagues will mean that they're more secure in what they've found and can defend it.